Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to talk just a little bit about note taking and review some of the material that you all learned last year in Avid. The first thing that I want you to note is what I have pulled up on my screen here. Um, we call this the three lanes, and you received a handout of this last year. And just as a reminder, when you are in class or when you're at home learning, either one, it's important that you are continuing to take notes over the material. And how you take those notes kind of depends on the way that the material is being presented to you. So, for example, let's say your teacher has given you an Edpuzzle video over a lecture that you're supposed to watch. Well, lectures traditionally work really well with Cornell notes. And so, in that case, you're going to want to make sure that you are uh, having a notepad out in front of you, or maybe a Word document out in front of you, and you're taking notes Cornell style over that lecture. Maybe the teacher is giving you a lab report or some kind of worksheet that you're supposed to fill out and complete. Well, in that case, you use what we call focused note taking, and maybe it's like a seminar or a discussion that you're doing that day. In that case, you would use a learning log. So you have to kind of think, what's going on in class? How are you learning information? Is it direct instruction? Is it indirect instruction? Is it something that's more interactive? And depending on what you're doing in class, that's the type of notes that you will take. We're going to start today by looking at Cornell notes and just doing a quick review. Again, this should be something that you're well familiar with at this point in your academic careers. As a side note, a copy of this three-lane document is in our Schoology page, so you can reference it at any time. So let's go ahead and run through just a little bit of review of Cornell notes and kind of the important components of note-taking. So first of all, just some advantages of Cornell notes. It's one of the most proven methods for mastering information. Sometimes students say, I don't like taking notes that way, or that's just not my style. And I understand that, but recognize that this is research driven. We've had psychologists and experts in education and experts in memory look at different methods of note taking and have found that the Cornell note method works, that it is effective, it is efficient, and it allows for retention. And it's easy to do. All you need is a piece of notebook paper, or perhaps you have some Cornell note paper. We get these little pads that are pre-made Cornell note paper, and if you need some of that, just talk to me, and we'll make sure that you get some. Why do you take them? Why do you take Cornell notes? The biggest thing is it allows for repetition. It allows you to study your notes outside of class. It stimulates your ability to think critically about the information. It's important that you aren't just taking notes and then never looking at them again, or taking notes and then you just look at them one time the night before a test. That doesn't really work. Cornell Notes allows you to look at the material numerous times. And this is important, again, for us to be able to organize the information, to process the information, and recall it when you need it on that test. So how do we set it up? You've set up Cornell Notes many times in your life at this point. Some of the big things, we want to make sure that we have the header at the top, which we'll talk about. You put that line down the left-hand side, and then you have room. It's kind of cutting it off on my screen here. There we go. You have room at the bottom for a summary. So here it is again, along the top, your heading, class notes along the right. You've got the 2.5 inch approximately section on the left and summary on the bottom. So before the lecture, what should you do? Go ahead and fill out that heading before the lecture gets started. What goes in the heading? Your name, the class, the date, the topic, and the essential question. All of these things are important. For example, when I'm teaching my content classes, I will often say, make sure you're taking out this set of notes. And maybe I give my students the topic. I say, take out your notes about memory and coding. Or I'll say, take out your notes from last Thursday. It's important that you have the topic and the date on your notes so you know exactly where that information is, so it's well organized. We want to make sure that we have that essential question. Again, that helps when you're going back and you're looking over your notes in review. You've got a decent idea of, well, what are these notes all about? What is it that we're trying to accomplish with these notes? What is the essential information that I'm trying to gain? While you are listening to the lecture, that's when you fill in the big section on the right. I tell people to think of the way that you likely took notes before you took Cornell notes, however that was, whatever that looked like. That's what goes in that yellow box area, that box on the right hand side. And so your kind of traditional note taking that you take while listening to a lecture, that goes in on the right hand side of your notes. Don't forget that while you're listening to that lecture, paraphrase. You're listening to this lecture right now from me. You don't want to write down every single word I'm saying. You would end up transcribing my lecture and writing 20 pages of notes. So paraphrase, use abbreviations when necessary. Skip lines in between slides or big ideas. Make sure that you're listening to the teacher for those cues of things that are important. I know that I will often say things like, hey, make sure that you remember this. This is going to be on your test, or this is a really popular term. So be on the lookout for those types of cues from your teachers. And try to keep it organized with bullet points when necessary. If the teacher draws something, draw it in your notes. Use charts, use graphs, use pictures. All those visual things will help you with your note taking. After the lesson is over, so now you've got that big chunk of notes done, well, then what do we do with it? Well, after the lesson, that's when you're going to go back and you're going to make sure that you highlight that important information. Maybe you ended up putting something in your notes that you don't really need. You can erase it or you can cross it out. I give a lot of dates when I give my lectures in AP psychology, and the reality is my students don't need to know those dates. I give them because I think it helps with the story, but maybe you wrote a bunch of dates down that you don't actually need. Well, you can get rid of that if you'd like to, and put stars and asterisks next to the things that might show up again on an exam. It's a good idea to try to compare your notes with a partner. That's real easy if you're in class. If it's online, it's a little more difficult to do. But maybe you call a friend, maybe you text a friend and say, hey, what do your notes look like? Hey, did you get this information about that new concept? So compare your notes to see, are you missing things? Are they missing things? Together, hopefully between the two of you or the three of you, you've got a nice complete set of notes. And then you want to make sure that on the left-hand side, you're generating good study questions. This is one of the times that students miss a ton of points on Cornell notes, because on the left-hand side, they're not writing questions. What they're doing is they're just putting the title of the slides. And so, for example, if you were making Cornell notes over this lecture, you wouldn't want on the left-hand side of the notes to say, generate good study questions. That's the title of this slide, but it's not a question itself. On the left-hand side, you want to have questions. What types of questions? Well, they're questions for things that perhaps you don't understand. They're questions that maybe are given to you by the teacher. They're questions that you come up with. They are things that will allow you to study these notes in the future. And the questions should hopefully be answered with the information that you find on the right-hand side of your notes. Later that night, what we ask you to do, maybe that night, maybe the next night, look over those notes. And you don't have to spend hours and hours looking at the notes. We're talking spend a few minutes, reread those notes, right? And while you're rereading those notes, maybe put question marks next to things that you don't understand. Not a question mark next to something, that happened in class. When you were listening to the lecture, hopefully it all made sense. But when you're going back and you're reading over your notes, maybe you're like, I don't remember what this is talking about. Why did I write this down? Right? You would add a question there. When you're done, you can put that summary at the bottom. Generally speaking, you should have about a sentence for every chunk that you have in your notes. So if you have notes that covered 5 slides and you have 5 kind of chunks of information, you have like a 5-sentence summary at the end. And the summary should be able to answer the essential question that's at the top of your notes. And then finally, we want to make sure that you're using those notes to study. One of the benefits of Cornell Notes is it creates a study guide for you. You can take a piece of paper, you can lay it over that section where you have the notes. Like you can see right here, you'd put a little scrap piece of paper right there on your notes. And then you have these questions along the left-hand side that you've generated. And you can just answer those questions and remove that piece of paper to see if you are correct. It works really well with math. It works really well with science and social studies, you name it. You put those questions along the left, or you hear, what is the significance of the speaker in the poem? You're like, I don't know if I remember that or not. Well, underneath that piece of paper should be the answer to that question. So use those notes to help you study for your upcoming quizzes and exams. All right, that is it. Went pretty quick through all of that. If you have any questions about this information, don't hesitate to reach out to me. And as always, everyone, good luck.